All right, the quotient rule. So just like the product rule, we can't just take the derivative of f over g here. There's actually a pattern that we have to follow. And it's very similar to the product rule, except for we're going to be dividing. And instead of a plus here, it's going to be a minus. So you take the derivative of the top times the bottom minus the top times the derivative of the bottom. Remember, you're going to subtract this whole thing, so a good idea to have these brackets here. And then that whole thing is over whatever the denominator was squared. So you just have to square that. So let's put it into some practice here. Let's go to the next page. Okay, so pretty simple one. We have just x over x plus 5. So let's just, I like to rewrite the power rule or the product rule. And it would be f prime over x times g of x minus f of x times g prime of x. And that's all over g of x squared. Yeah, and remember we're probably going to want some brackets there. So pretty simple here. The f is going to be the top, so that means that y prime is going to be, well, the derivative of x is just 1. So that times the denominator minus the numerator, which is x, times the derivative of the top. Derivative of x plus 5 is also just 1. And that whole thing over x plus 5 squared. Okay, this can be cleaned up a little bit. I see that we have 1 times x plus 5, so that's just x plus 5. And 1 times x, that's just x. And so we see that these x's up here cancel out. So I would just go ahead and cancel those out, and you end up with 5 over x plus 5 squared. Okay, pretty easy, pretty straightforward. That's the quotient rule. I want you to give it a try on a little bit more advanced one here. So go ahead and give it a shot, and then I'll pause it and unpause it when you're ready for me to show you how to do it. Okay, so we're just going to follow the exact same pattern. I'm going to refer to this quotient rule up here. And so we have the derivative of the top, which is just e to the x, times the bottom, which is 3x squared, minus the top, which is still just e to the x, times the derivative of the bottom, which the derivative of the bottom would be 6x. And that whole thing is over the bottom squared, so 3x squared squared. Now, quite a few things we can simplify here, and I would recommend that you do that. For example, you could definitely factor out an e to the x, a 3, and an x from everything. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm left with an x minus 2. And if I wanted to go ahead and square this, it would be, well, actually, let's think of it, let's just write it as 3 squared. I'll show you why in a second. And x to the squared, x squared squared is x to the 4th. So that x and one of these x's would cancel. And that 3 and one of these 3's would cancel. So the simplest way of writing this is e to the x times x minus 2 over 3x cubed. And that would be the derivative. All right, let's go to the next page. Okay, once again, I'd recommend that you try and do these both on your own. Just use that same quotient rule. I'm going to write it up here just to kind of refer to it. F prime of x times g of x minus f of x times g prime of x all over g of x squared. Okay, so we're going to do the derivative of the top first. So h prime of x, because f of x is like the top. So the first thing would be 5x to the 4th minus 3x squared. The 1 is just a 0. times the bottom, which is 4x, minus the top, times the derivative bottom, which is just 4. And all of that is over the bottom squared, which would just be 16x squared. Okay. Now there is a lot that would simplify on this one, and I would recommend that you do that. Like we could go ahead and distribute this 4 and this 4x. And so we would get 20x to the 5th minus 12x cubed. I'm going to go ahead and distribute the negative and the 4 at the same time. So that would be negative 4x to the 5th, positive 4x cubed, and then negative 4. And I did that just because I could see that there's going to be some like terms here, right? So, one more time, 20 minus 4 is 16x to the 5th, and negative 12 and positive 4 makes negative 8x cubed minus 4 all over 16x squared. And I think that this actually would even reduce, so I'm just going to do one more thing. Looks like I could take a 4 out of everything. So if I do that, I would have 4x to the 5th minus 2x cubed minus 1 all over 4x squared. I think that's as simplified as we're going to be able to get it. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Again, try it on your own first and see if you can do it, and then come back and see how to do it. Okay, so the derivative of the top, that's going to be 1 over x times sine x minus the natural log of x times the derivative of the bottom, which is cosine x, all over sine x squared. Not going to be able to get this much simpler. You can maybe write this as sine x over x, but that's about it. So there's the derivative. Alright, let's go on to the next page. Okay, somewhat simpler ones here. Probably going to be able to do these relatively quickly. One of the things that I would show you here is I actually would not use the product rule here. I would use chain rule. But let me do it both ways for you. We could do the derivative of the top, which is just 0, times the bottom, which is 5x minus 4, minus the top times the derivative of the bottom, which is 5, all over 5x minus 4 squared. Well, you can see what's going to happen here, right? The 0 here is going to just 0 out, and you end up with negative 60 over 5x minus 4 squared. Well, the thing that I would do here, and I'll do it in red, is I would rewrite this as 12 times 5x minus 4 to the negative 1. And now you just really have a chain rule problem here. So make u equal 5x minus 4. Therefore, du equals just 5. And this is like saying 12 to the u to the negative 1. Well, the derivative of that is just negative 12u negative 2. And remember, we have to account for the derivative of u. And there we go. So we could just plug all this in. It would equal negative 12 times 5x minus 4 to the negative 2, and du is 5. Well, look at this. 5 times negative 12 is negative 60, and that negative squared just means it's on the bottom, so that's 5x minus 4 squared. There we go. All there is to it. Next one, not as simple, because there is actually a function over a function, but see, I wanted to show you that you could do this one using chain rule. And maybe the quotient rule is easier for you, and if that's so, then use the quotient rule, but this is one that you could do either way. So, alright, one last one. Once again, try it on your own first. Pause the video, then come back when you're ready to check your work. Okay, derivative of the top is 12 times the bottom is x minus 2 squared minus the top, which is 12x, times the derivative of the bottom. And this one is kind of a chain rule. If you think about it, this is like your u. But you don't really have to do chain rule because the derivative on the inside is just 1. So you could just write this as 2 times x minus 2. That's it. I mean, because if you were to do the derivative of the inside, it would just be 1. So you don't have to really worry about it. You can just kind of think of this as, it'd be the same thing as x squared, right? You just have that x minus 2 inside there instead. Okay, and then the whole thing is over x minus 2 squared, so that's like x minus 2 to the 4th. And this definitely can be cleaned up quite a bit. In fact, there's a lot of things that you could factor out here. You could factor out a 12 from both of these terms, and you could factor out an x minus 2 from both of these terms. So if we do that, all right, 12 and x minus 2 out here, well, what would be left? Well, here there would just be an x minus 2 minus, remember I factored out a 12, I factored out an x minus 2, all that would be left is this 2x. And that is all over x minus 2 to the 4th. So you could see I could take away one of these x minus 2's. Not take away, but cancel out or reduce one of these x minus 2's. And so we are left with... Oh, also, I almost forgot. This, you can see that you could do x minus 2 minus 2x. That just turns into a negative 1x. So we have a 12. X minus 2x is negative x minus 2 over x minus 2 cubed. And that's about it. You could take out a negative and you'd get negative 12 times x plus 2 over x minus 2 cubed, but that's probably as simplified as you're going to be able to get it. All right, that's some fun practice with the quotient rule. See you guys on the next video.